Welcome to the True Sight podcast by Oracle's Elixir, your source for in-depth analytical coverage of professional League of Legends and the rest of the esports world. I'm Tim Magic Sevenhusen. Today, we're diving into the North American amateur scene with a pair of guests. Let's start with you, Cubby. Why don't you tell everyone a little bit about yourself and how you're involved in NA Amateur?
Hey guys, I'm Matt Cubby Samuelson. Originally got started, actually co-founded the first D1 varsity esports program at Miami University, Ohio back in 2016. Coached the team there, got a full-time job. I was cut to part-time due to COVID, so I'm back as a colorcaster, and it's been really fun kind of paying attention to both Scouting Grounds last year, now Proving Grounds this year.
Great. And Prussian, you've been on the show before, but for anyone who didn't catch the episode that you were on, why don't you give people an idea of who you are in the space, where you're coming from?
My name's Christopher Tro, also known as Prussian. I work as an analyst in the North American amateur scene, currently on Wildcard Gaming, formerly Radiance, and I sometimes make YouTube videos too. And you can check out my YouTube channel at Prussian Law.
Awesome. Yeah, Prussian does some great content. Cubby has been on a lot of the broadcasts. So these guys are both really good people to follow, and we'll make sure that socials and so on for them are in the show notes if you're not familiar with their work already. But we've got, I think a lot more that we could discuss about NA Amateur than we're going to have time for today. So why don't we just jump into it, talk about some of the things that are going on. We just wrapped up a few days ago the Risen tournament, the first of the Tier 2 tournaments for spring, and launching into the next one right away with Big League. But looking back at the one that's already finished, Cubby, from you, what would you say was the biggest storyline of the Risen tournament to you? What's if people didn't watch it, what's like the one thing that they really need to take away?
Yeah, I think that at least like the biggest storyline for me is I think coming in, everyone kind of looked at the rosters of ANEW, SolaFide, and somewhat Barrage, and we're like, these teams are going to wipe the floor with Amateur. And if there's one thing that we learned from Risen, that is far from the case. I think SolaFide is beatable. The person next to me beat them 2-0, which is pretty cool as well. They had to win 2 5-game sets in order to, win Risen as a whole. And I think that, like, looking forward and looking at the next tournaments that we have, I think that not only is Amateur going to be competitive, but I also think that some of those top teams are going to be really competitive against the bottom of Academy as well. So I'm pretty excited. And I think that's the big takeaway I had from Risen, is that it's going to be closely contested.
Yeah, and I think that the individual skill level between the players, I think people often come into this, especially when there's a level of familiarity with certain players and non-familiarity with others, the players that they haven't watched play before, and they just assume, like, oh, Zazel's on that team, nobody was ever going to stand up to them at all, or, Fnatic is on this other team, whatever, I've seen him play, who's this other guy and what's he going to do about it? And having the actual ability for these amateur teams to come in, made up of players that most NA fans have never watched before, and be able to actually take games off them and play on a similar level.
Yeah,
I think that's a great storyline for NA Amateur and its potential to, promote players up into the rest of the scene. Prussian, what about for you? What's your biggest storyline?
I have to agree with Matt for the most part, Cubby. So I'm thinking all the eyes are on SolaFide, especially after their performance as not Academy team during the Cup tournament and over the preseason. They absolutely smashed that tournament. They only had one, or maybe they had 2 games taken off them.
They dropped 2 games, yeah.
Okay, yeah, they dropped 2 games. I think one was to Mirage, and the other one, maybe it wasn't Mirage, but they dropped 1 game in semis, and they lost one in the finals to Cloud9 Amateur. And going into Risen, we thought that this team would be absolutely unbeatable. And they dropped several games, and they didn't look as impervious as we first thought.
How much of that do you guys think was due to the way SolaFide were playing versus the actual quality difference? Because I think people, especially if they just look at the results of this and see the drafts and so on, and they see Viper playing Vayne top and all that kind of stuff, I think you could be forgiven for coming in and saying, oh, SolaFide might be, styling a little bit, maybe even trolling a little bit, and they're a lot better than they like. Is that the case, or is it just an actual level of play?
I'm going to default to the person that beat him 2-0.
So I will have to tell you that SolaFide doesn't have Viper. Viper's on ANEW. So Sorry. They had Dokla. Yeah, you're fine.
Yeah.
So yeah, they didn't play the main top. I would say from personal perspective, how we beat SolaFide was a very good mix of good preparation. I think went into it. I guess that kind of makes it sound like, oh, I beat SolaFide, or oh, I had a really big hand in it. I don't think that's the case, but I think we did our homework and we showed up to play, and I think our players played amazing. And I think that roster that we were playing with at the time was probably top 5 amateur. I don't think that we can knock SolaFide down for dropping games, but I definitely think that they're just not as impervious, and I think that the gap isn't as big as we once thought.
Yeah, I think that's the hopeful, like that's the angle that you want to see, right? Like you want it to be that not that the favored team is not taking things seriously. You want it to actually be that they deserved to be beaten, and they actually were, right?
Mm-hmm. I think as well, like with SolaFide, I mean, like I talked to Apollo like before the semis to just kind of like, you know, prep some storyline and like stuff we could run for the broadcast. And I mean, he said, he's like, you know, like they forced us to like clean up our level 1. Like it was bad. You guys punished them really hard for it. But I also think like with SolaFide, like I mean the first thing that draws your eye is Apollo Zazel, right? Because I think Apollo is like the journeyman of LCS. I mean, that guy has been in LCS as a consistent you know, mid-tier performing AD carry since 2013. I think he only like hopped out once to like go play amateur, right? You look at Zazel. Zazel is still the best player on the Rift that we have in amateur, in my opinion. I mean, that guy's still crazy. But you look at like the rest of the roster, and I think that Tuesday has been performing well, but he doesn't get out of lane that well. And also, like, Winston's still a very young jungler, and I think that jungle is a really important role right now. Winston still has a lot to learn and work on, and there are junglers that are better than Winston that can punish him and did punish him throughout the tournament. So I think that they aren't unbeatable, and I think that they'll get better and start to improve on their gameplay. The individual mechanics are obviously there. But there are also some really talented up-and-coming amateur talent that we have as well that has been taking it to them.
Yeah, and I'd say like for Dokla's part too, his play in Academy was, I thought, pretty decent. He looked pretty strong last year playing with, I believe it was with TSM Academy.
Yeah, with Winston as his jungler, yeah.
Yeah, that's right. And those guys, you know, I think they didn't come down here as like, to me, like, oh, the rejects of Academy who couldn't cut it. You know, I think a lot of the Academy teams went in a lot of different directions, and some of the players who kind of fell out of Academy, it wasn't necessarily because they weren't good enough on an individual level. It's just, you know, whether it's the way things shuffle around with rosters, you always get some good players left out. And to have those guys come down here and get matched by players who are trying to come up from the amateur scene, I think that's great to see. But I think it also, the results that we've seen also tell a pretty good story about the importance of a team's quality as opposed to just putting the 5 best players together and thinking that they're going to be the best team, right? You can have 5 strong individual players who get beaten by a team of 5 weaker individual players who know how to work better as a team. How much have you guys seen that kind of strength of team quality or the ability of a team to prepare well together lead to results that you might not have expected just if you turn on the nameplates and ran them down?
Yeah, I think like Wildcard obviously beat them as Exhibit A, right? They had a few extra days to prep and really cashed in on that. I think Exhibit B would be EGP. Just the fact that they made it to finals, they took them to 5 games. And I say this to not take anything away from the players because everyone's very talented on that roster. But if you stack up that roster against SolaFide, I don't know if there's anyone that's like individually straight up better than anyone in SolaFide. Whereas like Barrage, I think Fnatic is a crazy player. And I would definitely take him over Winston, at least. But they play really well as a team. They definitely are benefiting from the fact that they have been playing as a team longer. And I think that's one of the reasons that they perform so well in Risen. They just have more built-in synergy already. But they're able to play. They're one of the few teams in amateur that I see that are actually able to play to multiple lanes. And I think that's really something that is important when a team has the flexibility to do that and can really throw other teams for a loop in games. And they're definitely showing that so far.
Yeah, for sure. What are some other teams? You know, I think EGP as one of the teams that has really impressed, and we can talk a little bit more about them in a bit. But you know, did you guys consider them to be a surprise? Were there other teams that really surprised you at Risen?
I don't think EGP surprised me that much personally. How getting as far as they did, I think was maybe a surprise. As far as teams that surprised me, are we speaking strictly in a positive sense or in a negative sense too?
I mean, that's up to you. I was fishing for positive, but if you've got negative surprises, I think that's obviously
here comes ANEW.
Hit me with it, Cubby.
ANEW's main team. They dropped out in quarters, and everyone looked at that roster and said, "Oh my goodness, Onda plus 5fire." Like, myself included, right? I mean, once again, I do not know what either of those players are doing down here in amateur, right? I thought Onda was the best jungler that we had in the academy. It was LCS ready. I think 5fire has been, like, he is the king of amateur, right? He's the 2-time repeating champ. And to watch him go 2-10 in game 4 and drop to ANEW Blaze was, I think, caught everyone off guard. And we were talking about it a little bit beforehand. They were running these crazy comps where they're trying to get 10k gold up in 15 minutes. And when you run Vayne top into a lot of the top laners, as Viper, you're able to gap them, but not Alorum, who has always been the weak side king. And that really came back to bite the ANEW main squad. And they're definitely the big disappointment.
Mm-hmm. I'm inclined to agree. Another one that comes to mind is maybe when Red Thieves Next, or even Cloud9 Amateur, who just kind of fell on their face. One that I definitely think was surprising in the positive sense was Winthrop. I think that that bottom side is absolutely insane. Doxa, Saskio, and Sir Kenshi, that is a winning combination. And while hybrids and Frost Forest, maybe I perceive Frost Forest as maybe a role player, and hybrids still has a few ways to get back, because I know he took a break from amateur. He was pretty solid top laner before, but he still has some of those pains getting back in. But overall, very surprised with their performance, because I thought they played very well throughout the Risen event.
Yeah, to what extent? Like, I think there are a few kind of college teams that are kind of breaking into those ranks. We've seen that in the past, right? Like there are a few kind of college and university teams that have come in and competed with the best of amateur. Do you think that trend is continuing to move? Like, are the collegiate teams continuing to grow and improve relative to the amateur teams, or do you think that's going to fall off more over time?
Yeah, I can definitely speak on this, just because, like, I was a student director for the program at Miami, and then I actually am the coach of the team this year as well. So I've been, like, sitting in on a lot of collegiate scrims. Maryville is the asterisk. That program is run like Duke runs a basketball program, right? I mean, those kids are there to play the game and then go to school. And the staff that they have around them are incredible. And I'm sure as we get to, like, talking about Big a little bit later, we will be talking about Maryville, because they were a team that was missing and has instantly stated that they are a top 5 team in SGC, or Proving Grounds, I should say. But I think that other universities have a long way to go. The unique part about Maryville is that the tough part about collegiate is that you have to play with the hand that you're dealt for the year, just given the student base that you have. Maryville is an exception, because they get full rides and they do a really good job of scouting and recruiting. I think that it's really difficult to convince the administrations of big schools to, like, actually fund this when they have football and basketball on the table.
Yeah.
And Maryville is a great example of what happens when you get talented people, an administration that buys in, and look at what they've done. It's been really cool to see. So I think there's still an exception. I think there's room for collegiate to grow. I think it's great that we see some of the collegiate teams competing at a really high level. Not only Winthrop, but I believe also Wichita, Bay State, Illinois State University all competed. And I know with some teams from scrims that I'd consider better than those teams that were not involved. So collegiate's in a good spot. I still think amateur is the best way to go, path to pro, because if you're good enough at League of Legends and you're 17, you can just go play pro. It's not like basketball where you have to go spend a year at university and then get drafted. So, but that said, it's really good seeing the collegiate programs compete. And Maryville is going to be scary this year.
Yeah, and for anyone who doesn't know their roster, who's playing for Maryville this year?
Chippies. We have Chippies. We have Odd Orange. We have Wolfie still in the mid lane, and then it's Evan RL, who got promoted from the B team, and then Shady, who is still there. And Evan Orell has been in collegiate for a long time. Very, very seasoned player and the most consistent performer from Supernova as well, from SGC in the last split.
Okay, great.
Yeah,
we'll definitely be keeping an eye on all of them. Speaking kind of still on the topic of, I guess, surprises, or maybe not so much surprises, but just like people who have impressed so far. Who are some of the players during the Risen tournament who I think, we talked about some of the names that you would have expected to see performing well and showing up, and some of them that maybe didn't perform to what we'd expect. Were there any players, one or two players who really jumped out and kind of like caught your notice who you hadn't been paying as much attention to before?
One that I alluded to before, I think Sir Kenji is very good at some areas that I think a lot of support struggle with. Obviously, we always talk about shading when we talk about map movements as supports in amateur, but I think Sir Kenji is right there with him. I think maybe his laning and mechanics leave a little bit to be desired, but I think generally the way he finds these angles to create roam timers or just execute with Trust Force is something to be admired for from supports, which we traditionally regard as being one of the lower rated roles in amateur. The other one, just have to throw it out here, is Trickster, because I thought Trickster is a absolutely incredible player. He played insane throughout Risen, and you can't knock anything off him from a gameplay perspective. Absolutely incredible player.
Yeah,
Trickster was unknown. Yeah, he was unknown and like really, really performed well. I think Gorica and Winter as a bot lane have actually been playing really well. Barrage, they love the team fight. They feed Gorica everything, and he makes a payoff. And Winter is definitely the primary engage role on that team. Sometimes he still has the propensity to have some tough engages, but he's also had some games where he just straight up carried Barrage with his play, especially on the Nautilus Alistar. Just really doing a good job of setting things up for his team. And I'm really thinking back to like game 2 of the semifinals where I think he went like 1-0 and 22 or just something stupid on Alistar and just made plays happen across the map. And it's been really nice to see Winter step up with his play, just kind of considering like he's been known as like the gatekeeper of amateur for support. Like if you can't beat Winter, you can't move up to the next level. And I think Winter's making a case that he might, still need to be considered to move up to the next level as well.
Yeah, and I think
Sorry, I don't have anyone else. I really don't have anyone else. Yeah,
I was gonna say, I think that brings up kind of this topic of, the players who have been around for a little while, who have had some experience at different levels, whether that's a lot of experience in amateur or they've played a little bit in academy, or in some cases even had some time in LCS or a lot of time in LCS if we're talking about Apollo and Zazel. But the potential of those players to come down to amateur, to compete well, to stomp the people around them, and earn another shot back, because I think it's a topic that has been relevant recently, and I think continues to always be relevant in esports compared to, I think, the talent development curve that we get in traditional sports, where there's much more of a physical curve to it, I would say, where you get the players and they're coming up as teens in their early 20s, and then they kind of fall off, and you go, okay, maybe their body's not going to be able to keep up anymore. Whereas I would say the development curve in esports is much less of a smooth kind of curve. It's much more likely that with a different style of coaching, or maybe a fresh mindset, or maybe some time away and coming back to the game, it's much more likely that these players who have been around before can find back a new peak that they haven't been to before. And I think some of the players you guys are mentioning here are examples of that, who shouldn't just be they might not be considered for, if you're making a list of like fresh new faces to be excited about, they're maybe not a fresh new face anymore, but that doesn't mean that they're not somebody who isn't still worth, bringing up into an academy team and seeing if you can get them to a new level that they haven't reached before. And I think we've got quite a few of those players in the scene right now that we're, especially as we get closer to the actual Proving Grounds tournament and face them off against the academy teams. We'll see if there, how many of those there are. I mean, Shoryu is an example of that, playing in academy this year, who was up there, went back down, needed some time away, and now he's trying to kind of find another peak again, right? So, yeah, I think there are a bunch of those, but there are also a bunch of kind of brand new players that you guys have mentioned. And some of those are playing for the LCS-backed organizations. And I think those are the ones that a lot of people are going to default if they're just coming into amateur. and they want to know which teams should they be interested in, or how are these teams doing. You're going to talk about EG Prodigies. You're going to talk about C9 Amateur, 100 Thieves next. Overall, how has that group of teams been doing, Prussian, in amateur scene so far?
I think those three LCS-backed teams specifically have been pretty much falling on their face. Not EGP, though. They're the exception, obviously. But those two, Cloud9 and 100 Thieves, we can't... I don't think that we can hold them under the same lens as we hold other amateur teams, since we can't necessarily interpret just, oh, this team lost, they're failing, as something that's accurate, because these teams aren't necessarily built with the intention of succeeding right away. But as far as what we're seeing, even development-wise, I think 100 Thieves and Cloud9 specifically, with the whole Tempos debacle, not meeting the strides that I would like to see as far as development of players goes.
I will say that for 100 Thieves, and like as a little bit of background, like I was actually the project manager like for that announcement video, and I got to talk to like all the players and the staff there. The average age of that team is under 18. They are hands down the youngest team that we have in amateur, and it is not close. And that was definitely a goal of the organization, right? Because if you're 100 Thieves, you can kind of treat this as a AA baseball team, right? We're going to try and develop talents and call them up. And if you look at 100 Thieves in the past year, 100 Thieves Next was a huge success in 2020. They got every single one of their players promoted, except for their coach that had come in and play. And he, managed to get all of his players promoted. I don't think you can really say any more good things about Fallen Bandit. Or not enough good things about Fallen Bandit and the work that he did. They're also dealing with rule swap. Busio is going from mid, and he would have been a mid laner that I was actually very excited about. He was a very talented young player for being his age. Now he's going to support. That team's going to need time. They are not going to figure things out, and at least credit to 100 Thieves, they are sticking to the fact that they are going to try and develop that talent. And if you think back to the roster with Tenacity Kenby, who I think many of us who have paid attention to amateur think that they're the future of that organization, they didn't do well in their first split of UPL, where they had Poom and Otto was still on AD. So I still have faith that they might be able to figure it out. Obviously, their performance in Risen and Big has a lot to be desired, but they're at least buying into developing talent in time. C9 Amateur is, for me, is a totally different situation, because due to poor scouting, and if they would have done their homework and asked anyone in the scene, we would have let them know that, hey, you should probably go with Breezy instead of Tempos if that's your plan. They let a player go who left school, left scholarship within 3 weeks and didn't commit to the development of that player. Now, I don't think anyone here is arguing that Breezy is better than Tempos. We're all very happy for Breezy for the opportunity. He is a great player that definitely deserves that. But we're all frustrated at the fact that we have a big org that did not commit to the development of a player when they said they would, and then they act like the way that I would expect an NA amateur org to act on Twitter when defending it. So that was really disappointing for me. And they, for me, that they are the kind of the failures so far. And I know they've played a lot better, but yeah, it's been really disappointing to see.
Yeah, and I think that brings up some larger topics about NA Amateur in general, and the infrastructure around it and the stability of the scene. And it really seems like coming into this year, one of the big goals for the LCS in instituting this new amateur infrastructure was, we want to bring in a little more structure. We want to bring in a little more stability. I mean, for lack of a better term, professionalism, in a way that, here's a defined set of official tournaments to play through. Here's how you earn your way up to this next level, all that kind of stuff. Even some things around player contracting. I don't know. Doesn't seem like there's a whole lot, but there's a little bit that they seem to be at least interested in being involved. And and the idea is they want to try to deal with these very frequent amateur issues where there are disputes between teams and players. Teams are breaking up all the time and reforming in different ways. These little constellations of players kind of moving all over the place. And especially, I think you would imagine that for the LCS-backed orgs, you would see a lot more of these long-term commitments in projects, which, I mean, with certain cases, as you mentioned, with Tempos being dropped already, that's the rest of them, I think, does look like so far they are at least, you know, trying to be a little more stable, but it's also just so early in the year that you can't really make a claim on that yet. But you would hope that the LCS-backed teams are going to have the longer-term projects where they carry players through the whole year and try to promote them or whatever it is, right? Do you think that there are signs that it's, you know, moving in the right direction in terms of stability and drama, or does it just seem like the same old so far?
For me specifically, I think that the more that we see time go on, I think that When Harry Thieves' first class amateur roster is a complete anomaly. Like, we will never see another roster where I don't even care about the two substitutes, NXI and Otto, but I think that the fact that all five of the young players that went through the entire system got promoted to LCS, not LCS, but Academy, yeah, LCS Academy. But I don't think, not even for EGP, can we say that all five of these players are going to go to Academy. I think that's highly unlikely, and I would call you pretty much, I would say that's wishful thinking. When Her Thieves next, the new class, Cloud9 Amateur. I think specifically with Cloud9, we are kind of seeing this remnants of this idea that Cloud9 has. I don't know how public the information is during the off season about how they act rather maybe a little disposable with their players, and I think that's how amateur rosters perceive their players to an extent in general. That if certain teams perceive, if this one player doesn't work, it's okay. The liquidity of players is quite high, so we can just get another one, etc. Same thing with, I think we're starting to see more of a shift towards, not exactly like it, but LPL farm teams, where you have several teams of players that may not necessarily be signed, but they're under your organization playing in-houses with you, and you're just kind of seeing what works, what doesn't work, who works together, and you're picking those players up.
Yeah, that could be interesting. And I think the question is whether the player pool is large enough to justify that, or, you know, also whether the players who are maybe in that position are playing under a different team banner that maybe is not like a really official, you know, organization or business or anything like that, but they're there and available. Like, I think we've already seen certain teams that are ready to be broken up and have their players moved off somewhere else just because they were kind of biding their time, right? And that can happen for sure. And I think amateur is always going to be less stable than obviously like an LCS level or something like that. You don't have the same kind of business case for locking players in all year and stuff like that. And there's a lot of balance to be found between what's good for the players, what's good for the teams, what's good for the overall ecosystem, and trying to balance all of the needs of that. So it's something that, you know, hopefully will be less dramatic and more stable as time goes on. And be what the players need it to be, right?
Yeah, I mean, like, obviously, like, there's been a lot of conversation around that. When we're looking at like the baseline and like what Riot attempted to do, Proving Grounds compared to Scouting Grounds is a major improvement, right? Because of this format, we now have X talent from LCS that actually feel like it's worth it for them to come down and compete. And one of the reasons that they're coming down and compete is because those contracts, like Zazel mentioned in his InBen interview, he doesn't have to get locked up in a year in Academy where it's tough to promote, right? If an LCS team decides they need a support, they could go down and grab Zazel if they want to. Same with Apollo. I mean, I think those guys can plug and play in LCS whenever they want. So it's a way for them to, you know, keep their skills fresh. They're giving amateur great competition because they're tough to beat. And they still can hop. And so I think that it's a major improvement. We also have amateur teams now much more available and ready to scrim Academy teams, which did not happen in Scouting Grounds. And that is also a significant major improvement. And so like things, there are some things that are better. Obviously, like with contracts and finding that balance, there's a lot behind the scenes that I think a lot of us are missing. And I hope that, like, you know, you're able to strike that balance between a player that, you know, wants to be promoted into Academy, they're able to do that and get out of that with a contract, but also, you know, you hope that I like to see some of these teams stick together. It's more fun to write storylines for a team like EGP, who won UPL and now made finals of Risen, where they're up against a way harder field of competition as well. So I like those stories. I like seeing those teams stick together, and obviously promotions are great. But the roster swaps, like super teams, are cool too. But it's fun to see those teams grow. That's like where amateur gets really fun for me, written for those underdogs.
And, you know, to continue on the theme a little bit of kind of the structural stuff and some of the restrictions around, you know, teams treating players as if they can be interchanged a lot and stuff like that, or other teams trying to hold on to the players and not let them leave, right? That kind of stuff. I think something that can sometimes be missed is that you need to incentivize the organizations to invest into the scene if you want to have that long-term growth. Like, you need to have some kind of system that allows ANEW to spend money on the scene, or allows, you know, Barrage to have a reason to exist aside from just being 5 players who want to play together. And if it's too easy for the players to up and go and the contracts don't mean anything anymore, like if Zazel could get an offer from an LCS team and just like without any kind of buyout or contract discussion or anything like that, just be like, no, I'm out of here, I'm going to LCS, then what reason does SolaFide have to invest into him, right? And I think that there have to be some structures in place that incentivize the teams even at the detriment of the players, and that's where you have to balance, right? You have to have some reason that when the teams invest money into the amateur scene, they get a return. That might not be a financial return. In some cases it will, but especially from the LCS org side, you know, they want to be able to have the return of, we retain some contract to control this player, so if we want to keep them, we can promote them and keep them, right? Yeah. All those kinds of things are just kind of the other side of the coin, that especially when you have these very player-favored kind of conversations, which are, you know, very legitimate and meaningful, but you can sometimes miss that other side of the story, that if the organizations have no incentive to invest, there's nobody going to be there to pay the players to play or to recruit the players in the first place, right?
Yeah, I mean, the quick answer is I guess we just have to find out what those developmental fees are, right? Because that is ultimately what is really going to encourage these orgs to invest, is how much are they going to get for developing a player. I don't want to use like EGP as an example, because like you figure that they're going to stay in-house, but you know, if you're a new or Supernova, you know, like what do you get from Addy if he gets promoted into Academy, right? I think that once those fees are like figured out and known, it's going to be a much easier ecosystem for those orgs to navigate, because like then they actually can, you know, invest in, or like they know what their return on investment might be. So
yeah, for sure. Speaking a little more specifically to the LCS-backed teams and the players in there, like we already highlighted a little bit, you know, some of the maybe potential scouting failures, but I think there are also some big successes we're seeing. I think especially on the EG side, players like Tomio, players like Aspect, Surdy, these are guys who look like they are really good pickups who might have a really good long-term future ahead of them. How do you guys feel, maybe Prussian, from your side, about the overall scouting that the LCS orgs have done coming in, and maybe not picking the teams that are going to win the best, but the teams that have they done a fairly good job overall of picking players who have, you know, good development trajectory?
So EGP specifically, I have a little bit of insight on how they run things. I know the big names on the team that people immediately look at are Shiro and Tomio. Shiro, I'm familiar. I believe, I don't know how long Empire's known Shiro, but I know that they had a relationship before EGP was established. Sturdy, that was a no-brainer. I had him. I was looking at him for probably about a year now and watching his moves really closely. Tomio, also a no-brainer. He's a big streamer. He's very mechanically talented, constantly challenger. Aspect, a little bit here or there, but I think it's pretty common consensus to say that out of those stack of players, Aspect is the more lukewarm one, I would say. Maybe not as high. Yeah, it's a little bit.
He's not as high, but he's being slept on too. Like I think
agree.
He's really underrated.
It's the copy principle.
Yes.
Yeah, precisely. I think as far as Winter Hit Thieves and Cloud9 goes, I talked about Cloud9 a little before. About how they it was a little bit of a first come first serve, and they didn't really intend for these 5 players to necessarily be together, and we kind of are seeing the backlash of that just currently with tempos and just their performance in general. They're not really working well together, and that's sort of the byproduct of the feeder system that I was explaining before. There was I'm not going to name them, but obviously we know that there's a 4th LCS affiliate team, and I know that they ran in-houses with all of their players, and I was involved with setting those up and vetting those. And I think that was a good process. I think that's probably the best process that we can think of, or that at least I could think of, for players coming together, and they're performing well above those other 2 teams, Cloud9 and Winter Hit Thieves. So I favor a more in-house meritocratic, maybe, process, even though what we know now is that those 5 players weren't necessarily all chosen meritocratically. With 100 Thieves, we saw the 3 TBA core get picked up. I think that was a pretty good idea to kind of have that innate synergy altogether. But at the same time, I think that losing a very big in-game leader like Otto has severely impeded the growth of these 5 players. And at this point, I believe Young's 19. He's the oldest player on that team, and I don't think he's necessarily ready to be an in-game leader figure. I think Gu played very well on TBA, and he isn't performing very well right now. Cozy, pretty back and forth. Acelion is a player that I really, really think needs an in-game leader figure, and Buzio is just not experienced enough to deliver a powerful bottom lane for 100 next. So I
can say though, like from talking with them, like their priority was age and making sure that like they get players like fell in that age range where they wanted to develop. And also Gu, Brian, and then Busio as well. The 2 of them for their age are incredibly well spoken and outgoing, and definitely have a lot of potential to like be leaders. Obviously, like role swapping is not the easiest thing. I've seen some promise out of Busio, like at least in lane. I mean, the guy is mechanically a freak. If you watched his LeBlanc play from the last split of Scouting Grounds, this guy is instantly on your radar for his LeBlanc play and like some of his other mid play. And definitely bringing that down to support is something that I think the 100 Thieves org is very hopeful for, because as Prussian mentioned before, we're not that high in the support pool here in NA Amateur. And if you can pull off a role swap like that, I mean, Otto was a role swap and he ended up back on his org CLG. I think it speaks a lot to, you know, Hooks now, like as a leader and as a person that he ends up with the same org in a new role. But if they're able to pull it off, I still think that like they have a good chance for development. Obviously, their performance has been very lackluster. But they're still like the initiative's still there. I still expect that team to improve, and they have the most room to improve, right? Like they're so young. They've got to be the youngest team in the tournament.
I agree, but I also sort of lament for the same reason that Busio swapped to support, because I think that there are quite a number of supports that are actually quite mechanically good in amateur. Just thinking about one, I thought Fizzy was very good mechanically.
Kenji.
Kenji's. Kenji I consider a little bit more of a cerebral player. I think Daption is very good in lane, is another one. But I think a bigger issue with a lot of the supports in amateur are just the fact that they have a hard time exiting lane, moving around the map. Plux is a really big example of this, where he would just walk back straight into lane a lot of the time, and you just can't play like that as a support. Like, come on. And I think Busio, he's very mechanically good, mechanically exemplary. But another thing that we would always see from his mid lane play is he had a pretty difficult time breaking out of middle lane. Even on these picks like LeBlanc, archetypally he's known as a Cassio or Orianna player. Even Syndra, these champions don't really leave lane often. And even as he transitions to support, we're seeing some of these similar issues where he's having a hard time breaking out of lane. And while I think he's definitely above the support pool mechanically, he still has the same problems as a lot of the NA amateur support pool.
Yeah, and that seems like the kind of thing that you don't necessarily learn well from solo queue, for example, right? Like solo queue, you're going to learn things like how to trade well in lane, how to be use your mechanics and skirmishes and team fights, stuff like that. But roaming is such a team oriented kind of thing where the rest of your team needs to know how and when you're going to roam and what to do. You know, your bot laner needs to know what to do while you're roaming and all that kind of stuff. So it seems like coaching is going to be a really big deal for helping supports learn that kind of thing. And I think that's, to loop back around and get to the kind of the LCS org side of things, that's something that you'd hope that they are investing in coaches at that level who are going to help teach these aspects of the game. And that are going to be a longer term project, right? Do you guys know much about kind of the coaching that's going on with these teams or some of the other teams that they're competing against?
I know that last year the 100 Thieves next team would scrim their academy team once a week, and then obviously I think that it's pretty fair to say the Fallen Bandits had like a pretty proven track record of like developing talent. They like specific coaching that's like going in. That's I don't. Prussian can definitely speak more on that.
But I have most insight on the fourth team, where they do scrim their academy team relatively frequently, and there's a good amount of that vertical, like academy coach helps out or intervenes a little bit with the amateur team. As far as Cloud9 is concerned, I would assume that's very hands-off, just judging by the whole incident, especially with Jack clearly not knowing what's happening within his own amateur team. That's not really up for debate. I would say EGP, obviously a lot of vertical movement between academy and amateur, where Empire is, he's in all the discords. He's always checking out his amateur team and amateur perspective.
Peter Dunn as well is very
yes.
Well, and EG also just announced the other day that they've hired Kelsey Moser as a director. It's a little unclear what her role is, I think, from the outside. Just we only know the job title, but some form of player development and infrastructure development around their kind of. It mentions collegiate in her new job title, so I'm curious. EG have done some things in the collegiate space, like seminars or stuff like that, but of course, with their amateur players and so on, and very obviously talent development oriented. So they've added that in as kind of maybe not direct. It's kind of parallel coaching, not direct team coaching, maybe, but they've been building out their infrastructure there too.
I mean, looking at like their offseason decisions, like bringing in Peter Dunn, who I think has made 6 rosters that have made Worlds, and then Kelsey, who, I mean, she has her ears to the ground way more than people like realize. If you're like not in the space, I mean, she might be she is one of the most knowledgeable people about any amateur, and when you look at her tenure as well with 100 Thieves, I mean, that academy team was killer. And she's definitely responsible for the development of a lot of the players that you see on 100 Thieves right now that are on that academy team and are performing very well.
And if you want to talk about 100 Thieves next last year and the roster, like she was involved on the amateur level and at least some, to some degree. So I think one thing that I'm kind of, as a quick tangent, one thing I'm curious about the 100 Thieves is what happens with their academy and amateur programs without her involved and whether they can keep up the momentum. I obviously hope they can. They do have kind of a rookie head coach for their academy team now. So I'm curious there.
I guess like we'll have to find out, but definitely credit to EG for because they brought in some heavy hitters that have a good reputation of developing talent. And I think EGP already, I know that roster was it was a pretty watered down split of amateur, in the winter where they won UPL, and then placed well in the Risen as well. But now that the competition's there, the fact that they're still performing at a very high level, I think speaks really highly. Because I know that coming into this split, I was well, I know EGP won, but now we have SolaFide coming in, ANEW coming on in. Where are they going to place in all these teams? And they're still placing really well. So I think it's been very impressive.
Not only do I agree, I think amateur super team, as far as staff is concerned, for Evil Geniuses, without a doubt. Just speaking about Peter Dunn too, I know he watches so many ERLs. I've chatted with him. He watches so many ERLs. I can talk to him about Dplex, Viteo. I can speak to him about Pretty. All of these players, Peter Dunn has on his radar. Mad Lions, they scouted a 16-year-old. I don't know what his second nationality is, but I think he was born in China, and he currently lives somewhere in Europe, Peng, for their it was either their academy or their amateur roster. He's a 1000 LP mid laner who plays on EU West, and he's not very good yet, but he's 16 years old. He definitely has that kind of potential.
He Peter Dunn follows every league.
Yeah,
it's not it's not just ERLs. It's it's literally everything. It's crazy. And so I mean, if you want to develop talent, bring in Peter Dunn, Kelsey Moser. That's a pretty good start. And obviously, I think that how their amateur team is performing at the moment speaks for itself. And I have some decently high hopes for their academy team too. I think they're top 4 for sure.
Yeah, I think that there's going to be a lot of excitement there, and especially seeing. I'm very interested to see whether there's any movement between amateur and academy, especially going into the second half of the year after the first proving ground cycle is done, anything like that. Moving around a little bit to the other side of the coin, we have these rosters that are pure development focused, that are, very young, very inexperienced players mostly. But we also have these rosters, and we've spoken a little bit about them already, but these rosters that are a little bit more like, proven commodities and amateur who are trying to take the next step. We have SolaFide, we have ANEW, we have Barrage, teams that are more here to win, right? They're here to prove themselves by winning these tournaments, where I'd say you'd look at EGP or CNN Amateur and so on, and their measure of success wouldn't really be winning every tournament so much as improving, right? Doing better and better as the year goes on. Let's talk specifically about SolaFide, because they have Zazel, they have Apollo, we've spoken about them. What do you feel like the potential of this team is, and how much they can accomplish over the course of the year?
I think Barrage specifically, I mean, some of those players should just be in academy. We can speak about how SolaFide is maybe a washed up super team, even though I don't necessarily agree. I think that's a good meme title, but I think when you look at the players like Barrage, Winter, obviously, he stands out to me as like a good in-game leader, likely deserves another shot at some point at academy. Fnatic, I mean, this dude's 19 years old, and
how is he an amateur, man?
Man, like, 19 going on 28. Like, this dude's crazy. Like, really good early game pathing. I really want the meta to shift around to the more dueling junglers, so we can see him style on people like he did 2020 spring, where before the 10.3 changes hit, where people were just spamming Trundle and stuff, and Lee Sin. Man, he was so good. APA, really young, great mid laner, top laner, high kick lord, maybe a little bit of a weaker point, at least for me on that roster, but still good, likely still deserving of a shot at some point in Orica. What do you say?
It just depends on which side of the coin you flip with PCL, right?
I can't lane. I think Gorica probably didn't really deserve to be out of academy either. I mean, one split, that's the only shot he gets. I don't know.
I think Gorka has been the best performing player on that team so far. He has been. I know that he only played 4 champions, and one of them, Vayne, he only played once in the semis throughout Risen. But I mean, his Kai'Sa play, his Samira play into Kai'Sa, he's a fantastic player. And I was really surprised to see him and Fnatic down here, especially. But I think that roster's doing really well. For SolaFide specifically, I mean, I think that given the investment they're putting into the scene and the pedigree of players they have, nothing but winning everything is acceptable for them, right? I think nothing but placing top 4 in proving grounds is acceptable for them once we get to the top 16. That said, I'm curious to see, because I know that one of the appeals of those players playing in amateur is the fact that if things go wrong in academy or LCS, they can plug and play, right? I don't know exactly what their contracts look like, but they aren't getting locked up for the entire year like you would in academy. So I'm actually really curious to see if that roster is going to stick around for every single tournament. I want it to stick around for every tournament. I think that they make the scene fun. They kind of came out as a bit of the villains. I actually got the chance to speak with a lot of their management. They have a really talented team of people around this team, and they're making an investment that is probably greater than every other roster that we have in amateur combined. So I think that them doing well will help the scene as a whole. I think them being around helps the scene as a whole. They are not just scrimming academy teams anymore after their experience with some of the teams in amateur as well, which I think is important to note too. And so I think having them here helps the development. But nothing except winning is acceptable for them. They have to win everything with the pedigree they have.
I agree. I would put forward the paradigm that maybe a few members in the SolaFide deserve to be in amateur. Like maybe they actually were meritocratically demoted to amateur, but I would put forward that what we're seeing on Barrage, there are a few players that are unlucky, and there are a few players that I think may have been meritocratically demoted before, but are making the case or have made the case in last seasons of amateur that they are more than capable of still competing at that academy level. And SolaFide just have to prove that also.
Yeah, it's interesting looking at these teams and trying to determine or read from the outside, why is this player an amateur when this player went up to academy or stuff like that. And I think one of the angles on that you have to take is, team LCS orgs sometimes will bring a player into academy who is maybe not playing at the same level as some of the other options that are in amateur, but that they think 6 months from now, 9 months from now, will be better or can be better, that they have more, undiscovered potential that hasn't been developed into them yet. And the other side of this is, I think we saw a huge rush of specifically Oceanic players, right, with the dissolution of the OPL and making those players considered domestic NNA. You brought in all these players from the OPL, partly because I think you could apply a little bit of the same lens to them too. Not to say that these players don't deserve it or aren't better than some of the amateur players who they might have displaced or like pushed down from academy into amateur. But I think there's a little bit of a rush on, let's get all the best OPL players that we can because suddenly they're all available. We don't want to miss out. And in some cases, I'm also curious over the course of the year, or maybe it won't be until going into next year, if some of the kind of homegrown, more NA-based players end up reclaiming some of those spots that were given up to the Oceanic kind of influx, the second Oceanic influx that we've had.
I think that this is actually a really interesting season of amateur for a couple reasons. One, we have proving grounds now, and we have teams with a lot of pedigree competing in proving grounds. We also have OS players playing in proving grounds, right? Maryville looking damn good with chippies in the top lane already, right? But also, I think one of the reasons that we saw a lot of people promoted, it was a very talented class in SGC that we had of prospects, I'd say. But also, keep in mind that half the teams in the league are backed by NBA orgs, and they lost a lot of revenue. This wasn't a season where we could just import and be like, all right, you know what? We know these teams are these players are good. Let's plug and play, them into our team and see what happens. Obviously, some of that happened. We have Elfari, who came over to NA and is already looking very strong as he did in EU, right? But a lot of teams were forced to go with more developmental rosters. Exhibit A, obviously, being Golden Guardians, who have Niles and Iconic fresh out of scouting grounds, playing on the LCS stage. We have OS coming on over. That's a great influx of talent. I know from talking with Zoo, who ran in-houses for just for collegiate people, and I had a couple of my players at Miami participate. He said the OS players were crazy impressive in those in-houses that he was able to pull off. But I think that this season, LCS was forced to go for a more developmental route just because budgets were lower. There was some talent there. I think that COVID actually kind of helped the fact that players, some players lost opportunities and all of a sudden they find themselves back in amateur. I know I'm actually exhibit A of that, right? And so I think that it's going to be a really interesting season just to see what happens when Proving Grounds takes place, because we have some really talented amateur teams, a lot of academy teams that had to go with a lot of young talent from last year, and we're going to see them clash and see, which managements made the right decisions and which ones didn't. And that's really the motivation from talking with a lot of these amateur teams behind playing, is that they want to prove that they should have been on academy rosters, right?
Yeah, and I think, from my perspective, watching just the first week of academy play last week, I felt kind of okay about it. I think I actually tweeted that I thought, it was going to be kind of tough for amateur teams to take down the academy teams once it got into Proving Grounds. But I started getting some feedback pretty much right away after tweeting that there's
scrims?
No names given, but some amateur teams that are taking games off of academy teams, quite a few games in scrims. So, I'm definitely interested to see how that works out. Scrims and stage is completely different, right? But and that's one thing that you hope that the players who have more experience in academy and so on have gained from that is the ability to perform under pressure, and that's why you need to get that experience of competing against them for the amateur players. But that's definitely something that is the most exciting about this new format, is seeing whether these amateur teams, both the ones that are made up of more experienced players or like amateur mainstays, but also the ones of the brand new players who can hopefully be coached into coming in here without any fear, and see if they can take down some of these academy teams with really very little to lose and a lot to prove. I'm really looking forward to that. Quick predictions from you guys. So the top 4 of Risen were SolaFide, EG Prodigies, Barrage, and ANEW Blaze. What do you think the top 4 finishes of Big League are going to be? Prussian?
I think Barrage is an easy one. I think SolaFide is probably up there. I would put maybe EG Prodigies. Yeah, I think EG Prodigies is another good bet. It's between them and ANEW main. And one that I think absolutely I'm 100% on is MU Red. Chippies is absolutely crazy. Yeah. He is one of the players that I wanted to talk about in my OS video. I was going to make a part 2 OS video. The ones that I had lined up right away were him and a player called Chaz, who's a mid laner who was on Avant Gaming and OS. but Chippy's is absolutely crazy. He's very mechanically good. I really can't say enough good things about him, other than he repeats a lot of the same things game to game. You can tell what his comfort is.
Out of the 4 teams, I think that there's a clear imposter among those 4 coming on through, and I'd say that imposter is ANEW Blaze. I think that team has some talent on it. I think Dark Wings and Raheen are pretty legit players, and we haven't talked about them yet. But if we want to talk about like young prospects up and coming, I think that they have to be on your radar. If you're really looking at that, I think Pocket Rhino coming in and getting some competitive experience is good. Prussian, I know that you've worked with him in the past as well, with Radiance. I don't think they're top 4, and I want to insert Maryville right there too. I know that Maryville, like, I think that one of the reasons they beat SolaFide, like, let's also take into account that Maryville has a very large and competent staff that are good at their jobs, and they had 2 weeks of free footage to go off of, whereas SolaFide were going in blind. Let's not forget this, as Maryville is 2-0ing people. That said, they're a good team, and they've proven time and time again they are a good team. They finished top 3 of SGC last split, obviously with Niles a different roster, but still, it's the same staff behind it. They have 2 out of the 5 players from the roster on this one. I think Maryville is a top 4, top 5 team instantly. And I think that there is a clear difference for me between the best 5 teams in amateur, or the best 6 teams in amateur, and the rest of the pack. There's definitely a big gap.
Yeah, going to be fascinating to see if those predictions come true or not. So I want to wrap things up with a couple of questions here that were sent in. First question is, what do you guys think about the fact that ANEW came into Risen with these 3 teams rather? They had their main team, and then they also had Blaze, and then they have their kind of developmental team, I guess you'd call it. It's called Genesis right now. What are your thoughts on so many changes happening to those rosters, like immediately after the first tournament, or even a little bit before the first tournament was finished?
I mean, like, the tempo situation, like, kind of caused a toppling effect throughout the league, right? I think that for Blaze, bringing in Pocket Rhino is actually a great pickup. The guys showed nothing but mechanical prowess and is very rough around the edges for being a competitive support. But I mean, throw him in the same boat as Busio, right? We know what he can do in lane. Let's see, how well he can get out of lane. And really big meme is actually someone that we used to scrim against all the time, because he came from Michigan State's roster, I believe, in collegiate. They used to be scrim partners for us at Miami. Me and Coach Hatham, who now works at TSM, he's got like a crazy pocket Kha'Zix. I don't think that he's as talented as some of the other junglers in the league, but he's not like a bad plug and play coming on through. And any roster that has a Lorem on it is going to learn a lot. Genesis, they pretty much just took Conviction's roster. So that's all I'll say.
I will say, I think Scott, Pocket Rhino, humongous W for ANEW Blaze.
Yes.
Love Scott. I think that he definitely excels at that area I was talking about previously, where I think he has a very good idea of how to get out of lane and where to go and how to create timers to roam and coordinating with his team. So very good for Scott. For ANEW Genesis, I think biggest strength they have is a immaculate coaching staff behind them. So tremendous W for ANEW Genesis. Good work.
So do you guys feel like these changes were mostly prompted just by like a domino effect of a change happened somewhere else, and now we're going to replace that, and while we're replacing this, we might as well do that? Or how much of it was it more that, or was it more performance driven? Like, hey, we think we need to make a change so we can level up our team.
I know Blaze. I don't know how much Shia Zuri leaving made part of the team go separate ways, but I know with Lean K / City Witty, I know he wanted to go to a different team with his friends, which are Rovex and Papa Chow. And I think Breezy just took the opportunity with Cloud9.
Yeah.
So,
why wouldn't you if you're Breezy, right?
Yeah, precisely.
Yeah, it's a great opportunity for Breezy, who's definitely a very talented player and deserves it. I think it's a domino effect, and then for ANEW Genesis, it's like ANEW was like, our third team won. Boom, let's get another third team, and then that's how that happened. Yeah. So also speaking on the City Witty or Lynx or Rovex Chow roster, they can definitely take some games off of. They can definitely push their way into a decent position in amateur if they get a little bit lucky. I don't know what group they fell in. The big league groups are. That's a different story. But if they got a good group, they might actually be able to like push to get some decent amount of scouting grounds points. And then we'll see what happens when Cup comes around for them too.
I agree. That's a really underrated roster. Shout out NovaBot. Sorry, just want to put that.
Yeah.
One last question that I want to bring up. How important do you guys think it is, or how valuable do you think it is, especially when we're talking about these developmental rosters, to have a player on the team who's been around a little longer, has a little more experience, maybe has been coached more at a higher level, for having the rest of the players get developed? So like an example of this would be like having a Lorem on a new Blaze, or having, when Hooks, who was playing under the name Otto at that point, was playing with 100 Thieves Next last year and had some academy experience and so on. Do you think that's something that, especially kind of the LCS-backed teams that are more development focused, should be intentionally building into their rosters, or should they just go for like the most, 5 most untapped talent players they can find?
I think that if you want better results, having an in-game leader would help. I mean, I know I can speak more on the like Auto Hooks, because that roster originally when it had Poom, like once Poom left and got promoted, 100 Thieves were like, well, we still want to keep Osama, like Auto/Hooks around, right? Because he's a great leader, but they also wanted Yon. And so they role swapped. And was Hooks the best mechanical support that we had in SGC? No. You ask anyone about what Osama brings to the team, they will write you an essay about how good of a teammate, how good of an in-game leader he is, and how him and Fallen Bandit as well had worked together previously on COG, I think for I don't know how many years, but like them as a duo, like they played in academy. They were now like working with a team here. I think that had a huge impact on the development of those young players coming on through. And every single interaction I've had with like Osama, I mean, he's just the nicest guy. And I think it speaks so much to him that he was picked up by the same org at a different role, like after like a year gap, right? And I think that he is a great success of like what can happen in amateur when a player that, like comes back down and then works their way back up, which we're seeing a lot of players try and do this year. Just given the fact there's more resources. So I think that's like definitely Exhibit A, and definitely helps. I know that EGP Mist has a lot more experience under his belt than a lot of the other players on that roster, whereas Tomio and Shiro are 17. Shout out to Ido for the info on that. I think that having a veteran voice in game definitely helps with performance, but there are also other ways that you can get that outside of game, right? I mean, like having Fallen Bandit and Golden Glue in your back pocket, that helps a ton as well, right? There's no one's more journeyed in LCS than Golden Glue. And so I think, I don't know what he's like as a coach. Obviously, this is his first stint, and he's working with the academy team primarily. But hey, having that resource as well out of game, not going to help as much in game, but overall development can definitely help.
Yeah, and I guess, Prussian, the angle that I think is really interesting this is, there's the in-game kind of leadership part and all of that, but there's also just the ability to teach, right? The ability to help with long-term development of the player and helping them learn new concepts and things like that. And how much of a factor do you think that is in having, say, a 4 fresh rookies plus 1, semi-veteran player versus the 5 fresh rookies kind of setup?
I think it's important to have one player be more experienced, or maybe the leader. It doesn't necessarily have to be someone with academy or LCS experience. I think that might be a little bit of a misconception. Furthermore, I think just because you are an academy or LCS does not mean that you're an in-game leader or you're capable of fulfilling that role in a team. I respect Otto a lot because he was someone who was willing to put aside his ego and think to himself, this is my job and this is the niche I have to fill, and that's going to make these 4 players better. And it's the sacrifice I have to take, because even though I want to play in academy and I want to get promoted, I have to put aside my ego and do what's best for everyone. And I think that it takes that kind of selfless personality to fulfill that sort of role. And I think, especially in League of Legends, it's not really a game that makes those kind of people stick around for very long.
Yeah, and I'm really happy that it worked out for him too. And obviously worked out for the team as well, because Yawn was, like, once again, I think the copy effect applied to Yawn as well, because he was just like weak side on that team. But he's a really, really young, talented player as well that is going to show up in Academy big time.
Yeah, I'm finding it fascinating on the Academy level how even just 1 week in, the Yawn Ayla pairing feels so much like the tactical core JJ pairing, just of like this like very very skilled and, you know, more experienced support player bringing the bot laner along and going like, we're gonna go in and do this, come on with me.
I mean,
and we're,
yeah,
I mean,
also like having core on that roster too, like looking at the in-houses, I mean, they play a lot together as well, like Yawn and core, right? So that's obviously a good relationship there for the organization, that those bot laners are working together. And that bot lane in LCS is pretty damn good too. So
yeah, we'll see how long it takes for Tactical to be sold for $8 million so they can promote Yawn behind him. And just goes through that. We'll see what happens there. Well, this has been a lot of fun. Thank you very much for joining me on the show today, guys. Cubby, what's the best way for people to follow your work?
First off, thanks for having us, Tim. This was really fun. I get to sit down and talk with you as well. Best way to follow my work is on Twitter, which is right below, at CubbyXX. And then I also do a podcast as well with one of my other co-casters, Smacks, where we just sit down and talk with players for an hour to 90 minutes. So if you're interested in that, on Twitter, it is PGroundsPod. We're the Proving Grounds Pod. And just trying to help players get their stories out, because it's important to brand players to move up to the next level, and that's kind of our goal. So we've had some good conversations and drop episodes every Thursday at 9 p.m. Eastern now, because we have to change the time because the Academy schedule is now set. So yeah.
Great. We'll make sure that links for that are in the show notes. And for yourself, Prussian, how can people follow what you're working on?
You can follow me on my Twitter. I post all my links to all my content there. Alternatively, you can check out my YouTube channel, which is, I think I got a custom link now because I got subscribers. So Prussian Law on the YouTube link. And that should be a new video tomorrow. I just remembered. So I'm excited for that one.
Go sub the Prussian's channel. All the casters use it for prep, and it's super smurf. It's really good stuff. Yeah.
Cool. You can support the TrueSight podcast at patreon.com/oracleselixir. You can subscribe on Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, as well as anchor.fm/TrueSight. And make sure you check out the Oracle's Elixir Discord server to talk about League of Legends esports, data science, and a lot more. This has been the TrueSight podcast with Cubby and Prussian, and I'm Tim Sevenhusen. Thanks for listening.